I think, yeah, we are recording now, so you can begin.
Excellent, thanks.
Excellent. So I want to share my presentation, and I really look forward to your feedback and appreciate your help all along the way. um, so the purpose of my case study is to really get a deep understanding of the impacts of unionization on the working conditions of adjunct faculty at a private research university. Um, when I say unionization, it basically is defined as the process of organizing adjunct faculty at a college or university into a union, and that union acts as an intermediary between the faculty and the university administration. Knowledge generated is expected to inform university administrators, labor unions themselves, tenure track faculty, and adjunct faculty about the impacts that unionization has on adjunct faculty working conditions. A little bit of context and background. This is not an exhaustive list, but scholars in all of the literature agree that the proportion of adjunct faculty teaching at colleges and universities has grown at a significant rate. Given the significant portion of faculty that are off the tenure track, higher ed leaders need to be paying attention to how their institutions support or really hinder this growing set of employees. The long-standing plight and treatment of adjunct faculty is nothing new in higher education institutions. There's a lot of literature out there on this. And some of the literature shows that, hiring adjunct faculty into roles in higher education, evades the need for these universities to have to offer benefits or pay a full-time salary to provide a path to tenure. There's some budget savings that I think universities factor in when they make these hiring decisions. Adjunct faculty are known to experience difficult work environments. They don't get space, they don't get support, they're not involved in curriculum development, and professional development is seldom made available. There are no quick fixes to the issues that adjunct faculty experience. However, in a recent article by Dorfield, he noted that higher education administrations are taking notice of adjunct faculty, the situation that they're in, and the resulting unionization movement of this group. Highlighted in the literature is there is a national movement of unionization growing across college campuses, and the important lesson is that unions typically occur where there are inequities, either perceived or actually occurring. And over the last 5 years, the SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, has sort of made a resurgence and has successfully attempted to organize adjunct faculty in major metropolitan areas. In terms of the significance of this study, it's really to explore the impacts of unionization on the working conditions of adjunct faculty. I feel like, in doing there's a lot of literature out there on adjunct faculty, but this particular situation is missing, and I feel like this case study will provide much needed information in this area as experienced directly from adjunct faculty at a private research university. The study will examine how unionization impacts the working conditions of adjunct faculty and provide insights and guidance to universities where adjunct faculty have unionized and or are considering unionization. And as mentioned previously, the audiences, I feel, for this study would be university administrators, labor unions, tenure track faculty, and adjunct faculty, all of whom are impacted by unionization of this group. Our research problem and question. So again, adjunct faculty are organizing and forming unions, the likes which haven't been seen in decades. About 1/5 of adjunct faculty nationwide are represented by collective bargaining units, and they have really shown a high receptivity to organizing efforts. In the past couple of years, nearly 10,000 faculty, mostly in the private sector, have joined the SEIU. Unionizing is forcing the reevaluation of how to pay and treat adjunct faculty. The purpose of this case study is to understand the impacts of unionization on the working conditions of adjunct faculty at a private research university. And my primary question is, how has unionization impacted the working conditions of adjunct faculty at a private research university? Finding a theory was somewhat challenging, but one that kept coming up whenever I was doing research was John Dunlap's industrial relations systems theory. And I think as soon as I put in unionization, that is what rose to the surface. And the industrial relations systems theory really consists of three actors: management organizations, the workers, and government agencies that play a role in the system. And when I was thinking about a theory, I kept saying, okay, the actors are the adjunct faculty, the university administration, and the union itself. The actors interact with each other, they negotiate, they use economic and political power to influence in the process of determining the rules that constitute the output for the industrial relations system that they all make up. The actors establish the rules that govern their own interactions, and Dunlap actually refers to this as the web of rules that governs these different parties. And that each of the actors comes into this industrial and this system having their own ideologies, and it's you know, an ideology is a set of ideas or beliefs held by these actors that help bind or integrate the system together as an entity. He believed that all of these ideologies must be sufficiently compatible or consistent to permit a common set of ideas which recognize an acceptable role for each of the actors. And I feel like that's where the collective bargaining agreement comes in, to get that, you know, the acceptable roles for each of the actors to help, you know, integrate them together into this system. Critics of the theory, there are many critics of Dunlap's industrial relations systems theory. One was Shea. Much of the literature on this theory was quite old, and back in 1980, Shea said that the breadth and abstract quality of the industrial relations systems theory, terminology makes the theory fuzzy. There's a lot of generality in the terminology. It's so all-inclusive and broad that he said it decreases the usefulness of applying this to a particular case. Colvin in 2012, which is a little surprising because it's around the time, I feel, when unionization really started to become a thought in the minds of adjunct faculty. But in 2012, Colvin said that the idea of the industrial relations systems advanced by Dunlap is no longer a plausible general approach for understanding American employment relations, given the decline of organized labor. And it's just interesting how that was his view in 2012, and there's been so much union organizing of this group and other groups in higher ed that unionization is percolating. So my rationale for using the theory is, again, because the purpose of my study is to understand the impacts of unionization on the working conditions of adjunct faculty, I felt like this, you know, was appropriate given the research topic. You know, there is this system comprised of these actors in these contexts. They all have their various ideologies, and it binds them together. There are a body of rules that are created to govern these actors in the workplace. And, you know, Johnny noted that Dunlap's theory can be used to interpret and gain understanding of the widest possible range of industrial relations phenomena. So again, I did feel like it was a good theory for this case study. In terms of applying it, the theory to the study, excuse me, in the workplace, Employment relations are governed by detailed labor contracts that establish a web of rules regulating work, employment, decision-making in the workplace. And given that unionization of adjunct faculty is the centerpiece of this research, the application of the industrial relations systems theory will be utilized. And I won't go into all of the detail, but in terms of the literature review, there is definitely a significant amount of literature on adjunct faculty. And several studies that I reviewed, there was a theme around the support or lack of support that adjunct faculty receive. There have been numerous studies talking about, that they're not giving support mechanisms to be able to do their jobs effectively. They're not given space, in many cases, computers. And that can impact their satisfaction, right? If you're not given the tools you need to do your job, it's going to impact how satisfied you are in your role. Another study found that, supporting adjunct faculty it hasn't been highly valued in universities, and that there's not a lot of policies regarding adjunct faculty, and that one of the studies talked a lot about how deans, who adjunct faculty typically report to, play a major decision in how adjunct faculty are supported. If you have a really supportive dean who goes to bat for you, it can really make you have a much more positive experience than obviously if a dean just doesn't do much in terms of supporting you. The other thing is that participation in governance can facilitate support for adjunct policy changes. And again, there was a lot around support or lack of support in the literature. The other section in my literature review talks about working conditions. And again, there was a lot of literature around the particular working conditions of adjunct faculty. One particular study was very specific to a discipline, technical and professional communications discipline. And it was regarding the working conditions of adjunct faculty, that their course, it looked at their course loads, their compensation, their professional support. And the study actually yielded mixed results in terms of their satisfaction with their working conditions. There was another study that examined the working conditions at a 4-year public institution, and it highlighted what administrators could do to improve the working conditions of adjunct faculty. And there was another study that noted that the poor working conditions contributed to challenge of adjunct faculty, and this was specific to delivering instruction at a community college. Another section in the literature review, there was several studies written around faculty employment status, meaning adjunct faculty or tenure track faculty, and the impacts on students. And there were mixed findings. So one study in particular said that students who were taught by adjunct faculty received less individual instruction as compared to tenure track faculty, because adjunct faculty didn't have space, they didn't have access to computers, they weren't receiving professional development on the latest teaching technologies. And in contrast, there were 2 other studies that said students taught by adjunct faculty have better retention and are more likely to take more classes, and adjunct faculty lead students to do better in subsequent coursework than do their tenure track faculty. So it was mixed results on faculty employment status. In searching the literature, there was very little written about adjunct faculty and collective bargaining. There was one study that I found where Rhodes actually pulled multiple collective bargaining agreements where adjunct faculty had been unionized, and reviewed the collective bargaining agreements to look at contractual provisions around class cancellation fees for adjunct faculty whose courses were changed at the very last minute. And the study found that with these collective bargaining agreements, there have been gains made in the due process rights for adjunct faculty related to class cancellations, but there was still significant managerial discretion remaining. So in summary, there has definitely been much written about the plight of adjunct faculty, the support or lack of support they receive, how it, and how that support impacts their satisfaction, and also on the working conditions under which they perform their jobs. The literature, there was mixed results as to whether students do better or worse with adjunct faculty teaching them. There's very sparse literature related to adjunct faculty unionization or collective bargaining. And there were I couldn't find many case studies. There were a lot of studies, but not specific case studies. And I could not find one recent study where John Dunlap's industrial relations systems theory was mentioned. So I thought a significance for this case study is in using that theory would fill a gap in the literature. In terms of the qualitative research approach, a qualitative case study would be the best research approach to gather information on this topic. For the purposes of this study, Robert Yin's methodology would be utilized. I'm asking a how question about a contemporary set of events over which, I have little or no control. As a research method, the case study is used in many circumstances to contribute to our knowledge of individual, group, organizational, social, political, and related phenomena. And I felt like by doing a case study, it would allow me to focus on a case and retain a holistic and real world perspective from adjunct faculty. Yin states that a case study's unique strength is its ability to deal with a full variety of evidence. And he notes 6 sources of evidence that are most commonly used in doing a case study: documentation, records, interviews, direct observations, participant observation, and physical artifacts. And I'm anticipating utilizing all 6 sources of evidence if possible. I'll do my best to use as many of the sources or gather as many sources of evidence as I can possibly gain. Participants, so the participants will be those classified as adjunct faculty. The site will be a private research university. I am anticipating recruiting 3 to 5 current adjunct faculty members to participate in the study who were employed at the private research site prior to and after unionizing, because I want to have the perspectives of, before unionization and after unionization. I did some research and feel like purposive sampling would probably be the best approach, where I'd be focusing on individuals who are able to assist with the relevant research. I'm going to reach out to a larger number of potential participants via email to introduce the topic and solicit participation, but I anticipate having 3 to 5 interviews to use. I'll determine eligibility and follow up with a consent form before the interview process, and I'll make sure that participants know that their information will be kept strictly confidential. I'll use pseudonyms. I'm not going to mention the research site by name, and I'll also let them know that they will receive compensation for participating in the study. In terms of the procedures, Yin noted that you really need to set up some protocols before you go down the path of, soliciting participants. So, one of the things that I need to really do is make sure that I have a very clear overview of the case study, the rationale, the theory, and communicate it to, everyone involved, that this is the purpose of my study, this is the setting. And I really need to ensure that I have a well-planned process for collecting my data. I need to ensure that I have the appropriate tools while doing the field work. I want to have a timeline so that I can keep it, this particular chapter on track when it comes to, data collection, and as always, be prepared for unanticipated events. I have applied for permission from university administration to study adjunct faculty at a private research university. Unfortunately, the one that I had my hopes on declined. So last week, I sent out a bunch of emails to universities that fit the criteria. And I'm hoping that one of those research sites will allow me to recruit participants. It may be that it's not a private research university. I am asking other private research universities if I can use them as a site, but I also had to expand my options to a community college and a liberal arts college. Once permission is granted from the said university, I will seek approval. My IRB application is ready to go. I have described the project in detail. I have consent form. I have the interview questions. I outlined the data gathering project process, and I just need to get that reviewed and approved. And as mentioned, I am seeking information. If I get approval from the research site, I will work with the person who I get the permission from to help expedite and identify participants so that I can start the recruitment process. In terms of data analysis, it consists of examining, categorizing, tabulating, testing the findings. I will organize the data that I receive from the adjunct faculty interviews, and I anticipate face-to-face interviews, but if I don't get approval from a local university, I'm going to have to go the Skype method. I'm hoping that I can do face-to-face, but if not, I will do the Skype method. And I will be doing the transcription, and I am going to use in vivo software, which supports qualitative research. It's a way to store, categorize, and help me analyze the data. Yin notes that it's important for you to play with the data, look for promising patterns and insights and concepts. The goal to, define priorities for what to analyze and why. I anticipate using in vivo coding as my first cycle coding, and that's basically verbatim coding, or also known as verbatim coding. Saldana said it's really appropriate for qualitative studies, in particular because I want to honor the voice of the adjunct faculty participants. After the in vivo coding, I expect to use second cycle coding method, and basically it's taking what I did with the first cycle coding and then using it to come up with themes or categories with which to work with the data. In terms of ethical considerations, Yin says a good case study researcher strives for the highest ethical standards while doing research. That is what I strive to do before participating in the study. I'll make sure that the adjunct faculty are made aware of their rights. I will gain informed consent from the adjunct faculty. I'll provide details of the case study. I'll formally solicit their volunteerism in the study. I'll inform them that at any point they can refuse to participate. They can withdraw at any time. I will let them know it's my job to protect these folks from any harm, including, using deception. I will let them know that it is my role to protect their privacy and confidentiality, and that I will not put them in any undesirable position. I will also let them know that I will be keeping all documentation and interview notes in a secure, locked space. Trustworthiness, Yin highlighted 4 tests that should be applied throughout the study, so I need to focus on construct validity, basically using multiple sources of evidence to encourage convergent lines of thought, and to establish a chain of evidence, and drafting a report that can be reviewed by participants. Internal validity, I need to ensure that inferences are not being made incorrectly as I'm doing my research. I also need to consider external validity where, knowing whether the study's findings are generalizable beyond this immediate study, and focus on reliability, where I really need to be documenting and really keeping good documentation so that if a later researcher said, I'm going to do the same case study that Kelley did, that the investigator should arrive at similar findings and conclusions. And I will use triangulation and, as mentioned up, member checking, so that I will have adjunct faculty review their transcripts to ensure that I captured what they said correctly. Potential bias and research bias in managing it. So I am a longtime human resources professional. I work in higher ed. My colleagues and I are always concerned about segments of the workforce unionizing. In particular, right now, being in higher ed, there is a focus on adjunct faculty. Recent unionization and/or unionization efforts made by adjunct faculty have many in higher education administration paying attention, including myself. From my perspective, I always thought that the main reason adjunct faculty unionized was because of inadequate pay, and I work in compensation, so we're always looking at, are we paying our adjunct faculty, are we paying them appropriately and fairly? And based on the review of the literature, while pay is definitely a factor, it's not the only factor. So, that's something that I need to be sensitive to. And in terms of managing research bias, so I do work in the field of human resources, and it's part of my job to exercise sensitivity and maintain confidentiality. And throughout this particular study, I will try to remain objective and will continuously be mindful of subjectivities. I know that that is something that is something that researchers really have to pay attention to. And I feel like I will be very transparent about my positionality and let interviewees know that here's where I'm coming from. I hope that participants view me as credible and trustworthy. Limitations. So while my study hasn't been conducted, I was trying to anticipate what limitations may arise, and the research site. So if I do get access to the private research university, it's going to be specific to a private research university, and it's not going to include adjunct faculty from, a public four-year college or a community college. I do anticipate some challenges with the theory. There's just not a lot out there, and it's a bit antiquated, but I do feel like I can apply it. But I do think it's going to be a little bit challenging. And I do anticipate that other limitations are going to arise as I do this. I just haven't, I'm just not sure what they are yet. So I will note them as they arise. I will make sure that they are noted in the appropriate chapter. And then the last pages are references.
Great work, Kelley. This is fantastic. Yes, very nice job. I really appreciate the time you took to pull all of this together and really walk us through where you are. We can still see your screen, so you can stop. That's okay. That's okay. No problem. You can stop sharing, so we can just talk about this from here on. I don't know, Brian, if you can. She needs to just press stop sharing. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So I was taking some notes as you were talking, Kelley, just some things I want to ask you about and clarify, but I'm going to defer to Dr. Patterson first as your second reader. Give him the first opportunity to talk with you about any questions or clarifications he has.
Okay, thank you so much. First and foremost, well done. I mean, very well done. I was very pleased to hear your work, and that's a testimony to not only you, but also your advisor. I know that she does a great job in preparing her students. So this makes my job easier as a second reader. I mean, you covered a lot of the major points that sometimes are blind spots, so I appreciate that. The only thing that I had a couple questions on goes back to your chapter 3, which were is always probably one of the sticking points for any of the research models, is to kind of look at how do we actually do the work. And so my concern is, I heard you mention the fact that you initially put some feelers out and then you didn't get a positive response, and you also mentioned expanding your net to even looking at a community college as well as I guess a 4-year institution. I mean, not not a public 4-year institution. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, can you give me a little bit of the rationale? I'm wondering if that would change or alter your study too much. And when I say that, based on what you have put together, I understand what you're trying to do, and it makes sense to me, but at the same time, I don't want to, alter your study so much that when you look at those certain populations, you may, in essence, get something completely different than what you initially set out to do. Can you speak to me a little bit about that, or just maybe even if we have to alter our approach a little bit or the wording, because I think that that's the thing that we want to, maybe expand it, that it's more inclusive of, just adjuncts who serve in, a certain population or a certain area or region, instead of, you know what I mean? We can put other parameters in place that would, still put you in a go position and not limit you. So that's where I'm going with this.
Absolutely. So, thank you. I just naively assumed that as a student at Northeastern, the whole time I was thinking, as I was working on this, I read a lot about adjunct faculty who were working at Northeastern, pretty contentious. The unionization movement, and that adjunct faculty at Northeastern, they did unionize, and they've been unionized for a while. So I thought, oh, this would be great. I can do my study at Northeastern. Again, not saying Northeastern, just saying a private research university. So I emailed the provost office, and I, sent my blurb and said I, would love to be able to recruit adjunct faculty at Northeastern to, participate. And the provost office was reluctant to give me permission. They were fearful that it would look like this was a university-sponsored study, and that adjunct faculty would be compelled to participate, and they would be compelled to give a university, I guess, a positive university spin.
Absolutely.
And so then I was like, oh dear, what do I do now? And I, with Dr. Alpert's help, I said, all right, let me do some research and say, where are there other universities that have been unionized their adjunct faculty have been unionized long enough that I could get the before, and there was enough time after that they could really speak to how unionization has impacted their working conditions. So the other schools that I emailed were Lesley University, Tufts University, and then the other two that were like long shots. Just I hope I don't have to go there, but if I do, one was St. Charles Community College, and the other was McDaniel College. Again, they're not local, but they fit the criteria of having unionized recently and having unionized long enough that adjunct faculty could really talk to how it's impacted them. So
Correct.
that's where I am right now, like
Okay.
desperately trying to find a research site.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, and Brian, Dr. Patterson, one of the things we talked about as well was, you know, I'm kind of thinking, I think we're thinking on the same lines.
Hmm.
If it's hard to get a site, because it is a sensitive issue, right? So
Absolutely.
I think Kelley might run up against a wall in some of these other institutions. I hope not, but I think that answer from Northeastern might be indicative of what we might see in other institutions because of the sensitive nature of this. So one of the things that that Kelley and I were talking about was, you know, there are tons of options. You can look at this so many different ways.
Hmm.
You know, if we can't get a school, one of the things that I mentioned to Kelley was, you know, you can still study and just pick, you know, adjunct faculty in different universities and include them in a study. That, of course, changes your method, right? Then you're no longer looking really at the organization because you're looking
Hmm.
at different organizations. You're more looking at the individual, and it becomes more of a narrative study or an IPA type study. So it changes the nature of that. And I know Kelley is kind of hoping to stick with case study, and I think that makes
Hmm.
sense. But yeah, we've kind of gone down a couple different paths and thinking through that. But Kelley, I do hope that you can get a yes from one of them. And if you need another in at Tufts, we have one of our students in our SPC, Raymond OU is his last name, is a dean at Tufts. And I don't know what his sphere of influence is, but just so you know, if you've got another connection there, if you wanted to reach out to Raymond.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, that was probably one of my biggest question is, you know, seeing how you can actually get this population that you're seeking. I like the study and I like how you have framed it. Naturally, I wouldn't say I'm surprised in the response from Northeastern. I think they're very careful, especially with the large number of people who I guess fall in that category. Even when I started, I was in that category. So naturally, that's one of the things that um, it's a little challenging. The only other thing, so I guess that's one of the things. Once we find that out, then that'll be, I guess, helpful in framing the rest of your study. You talked about numbers 3 to 5. I guess as it relates to a case study for the organization, that seems about right. I don't know if that needs to be expanded, but naturally, you know, casting a wide net is always important, just in case that you have folks fall out or not participate. When you also mentioned case study, had you thought about your questions or how you wanted to formulate this? I think I have a good idea, but I just would be curious, or maybe even one or two of your kind of interview questions, or what are you hoping to initially find from your study? Maybe that's a general question that I'm kind of curious to see.
Yes, and so I did rework some of my interview questions based on Dr. Alpert's recommendation to have it be more, to get more information out of
Hmm.
the adjunct faculty that I'm interviewing. And so one of the things that I did, and these may have to change, is I sort of looked at the collective bargaining agreement for Northeastern, and I was trying to get a sense of them to say, like, tell me about your experiences with academic freedom before and after unionization.
Hmm.
You know, what has your experiences been with access to services or unit support before and after unionization with course assignments, to really sort of see, you know, how has unionization impacted your working conditions? And those are just a couple of the questions, but it was really, you know, tell me about it before and after.
Okay. Okay. Gotcha. I was just dialing back into your questions now, and then I kind of
Yeah.
understand better now how you framed them. So thank you. That's helpful. Um, I think that those. I mean, honestly, I didn't have a whole lot of pushback on your idea. I think it's a great and timely study, truthfully. And so for me, I'm really excited to see what happens. I love the fact that you say, tell me more about the impact as you list in question 8 about the benefits. So that's also something that, again, when we look at adjunct faculty and being a part of the union, what are the benefits? And so that's been one of the things, even with full-time faculty, we're looking at, well, what is now being offered, especially as you mentioned before, this shift now of adjunct. And I think is a greater conversation that is a change from not having what we have in the past, a true more tenured faculty and those tenured roles too, that you move to these kind of folks that we hire, but we like them, we'll keep them on, but we're not necessarily going to give them as I say, the full loaf. They only get, a piece of the loaf of the bread, as far as the benefits and stuff. And that's my analogy, because I get frustrated with the fact that, well, we get some of those, but the expectations are still in place to perform like any full-time faculty and to do the same obligations. And so anyway, not me. Let me get off my soapbox. Those are the only major questions that I had. Just with the number of folks that you intended to, feel that you get a good snapshot of that population. And, I think your method is appropriate. I truthfully have to read up a little bit more on your framework a little bit more. And you mentioned the fact that you wanted to get, some experience in connecting Dunlop's work. Is that right? Or some aspect? Yes. I know you said it hasn't been recognized as a viable work in a number of other studies that you have found for quite a while. So I'm just curious. Well, maybe this is kind of a broader question. It seems like you've connected to that in some way. Is there something more about the study or that framework that really drives you? And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Alpert, because I don't have any more questions. It's just more of a wonder, how did you get there? So Dunlop's theoretical framework.
Yeah, so when I was searching for a theory, I actually went through several. And this one, I just kept coming back to this one because the focus is unionization is such a big part of this study. And I just kept going back to Dunlop's theory and trying to say, okay, how would I make it work for me? And I kept thinking, okay, here, everything I was reading, I'm like, all right, the actors, here are the actors. Again, I kept thinking Northeastern, but, and here's how they have to work together to make this system. And here are all these other things, like a collective bargaining agreement that brings them all together. And it just, even though it's antiquated, I felt like, oh, maybe I could bring it back to life for this study.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll take that for right now. I don't see any problem with that. I know that oftentimes when we look at, studies and the frameworks that we are trying to create, we want to make sure that they're, 100%, just fit in line with what we're trying to do. And that's the thing. Sometimes we do get them, but if you're able to successfully put the right perspective and lens on it, I am very comfortable with it. And I know Dr. Alpert has thoroughly vetted you on that. So, I'm done with my questions. Overall, I'm pleased, and I think you did extremely well with your presentation. I'm really, really happy. Actually, I may even use yours as a model and how you organized it. It was very succinct, and that makes me so happy. So happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, I agree. So let's just touch on that while we're on the theoretical framework. I do appreciate using something that it's unique in that it hasn't been used in a while, but I do think it is well suited for what you're looking at, particularly if you continue to look at an organization. So if we end up going with individuals, we might want to revisit that. But if we continue looking at an organization and a case study, the only comment I would say there is that if Colvin has reinterpreted it or brought it more into the current day, it might be that you start by saying that this theory was proposed by Dunlop and it's been reinterpreted or expanded by Colvin, and so you're using Colvin just to make it more current. That would actually close the gap for everybody who's looking at this, like me, like Dr. Patterson, like anybody else, who says, Dunlop, are you sure? But that's what happens a lot with theoretical frameworks, is that somebody starts it and it's been 20, 30, 40 years, but someone else says, oh, yep, I'm going to bring it in and reinterpret it. So you might want to just look and see if you're using Colvin, you're using Dunlop, but it's being reinterpreted by Colvin. So just give that some thought.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the only thing I would also probably echo with that. That's part of the reason why I asked about Dunlop in general, because if you have a newer kind of interpretation, sometimes, not saying it's always better, but they've taken time to hopefully really do the work and research it and then expand that reach.
Okay. I'm running through my list here, Kelley, so just bear with me. Okay, so there was a comment on your presentation about gap filling, and I do think that this study is unique. In the program, generally, we don't talk about gap filling because we're focused on, the scholar practitioner, and sort of so being, having a particular context and having a local context is really okay. And I know people like to just generally come in and say, oh, this study is really going to fill a gap in literature, and that's okay. We don't tend to use those terms in the program. So I don't know if that showed up in your narrative or not in the chapters. I don't remember seeing it, but just something to be aware of, that that's not as critical an item for us as we're looking at this. It's the fact that you've found something that you're passionate about. You're doing research for the first, basically for the first time in this context, and you've got a well-planned study. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'll go back through. I can't remember if I mentioned gap filling in the chapters.
Okay. Perfect. Then Yin, just so you know, Yin has come out with his 6th edition. So if it's possible, and the reason I mention it, if it's possible for you to get the 6th edition, it's just come out. Like, I just ordered it and I don't have it yet. It's possible to get it. The reason I mention it is because you have referenced Saldana and your in vivo coding and that kind of thing, which is okay. The only problem is if you're doing a case study, Yin is your guy. So I'm hoping, Yin doesn't do a fantastic job in his chapter on analysis. It's an okay job, but it's not a great job for somebody who's just started. I'm hoping that this next edition maybe addresses that, because he even says, there's not a great way to analyze case study data. And I'm like, well, then give us a roadmap, please. So he doesn't give a great roadmap in this edition. I'm hoping he does in the next. And I really want you to focus on Yin. Although Saldana is great, you might be able to find in Yin the same kind of steps that you would use, but you really want to refer to Yin first and foremost.
I felt like I agree. Like, the data analysis section was not very detailed, and I supplemented with Saldana because he is so detailed. Yes. So yes, I will definitely get the chapter. The 6th edition.
Okay, great. And I think, if Yin happens to, in this next edition, if he happens to sort of reference Saldana, or, if he does a better job, then it'll be easier. Make this as a note for yourself. You get the book, you can kind of check through and see if that works. One other thing, a couple other things, working conditions. We need to be really clear about what those could include. You don't have to know all of the working conditions out from the outset, but you need to be really clear about, when you say working conditions, what it means to you right now. In your data, it might mean something else, and that's fine. But what does it mean to you right now at the proposal stage? What are working conditions in some general terms? So we can be clear about that.
Where we do the definition, I think the only definition I have is adjunct faculty. Should I add working conditions as, what it entails?
Yes, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, that just came through. I've, as many times as I've read your work, that really kind of came through today as I was listening to you. I was like, wow, working conditions. Go to talk to somebody about their working conditions. What do they think about? Are they thinking about the computer, the space, the culture? I mean, it could be anything. So you define it, and then let them define it, right? They'll define for you what their working conditions are, and then they may be similar or they may be different. But yeah, if you can add that definition, that'd be great. Your interview questions are good. We've worked on those a lot. I think they look great. Just anytime you have a chance to elicit a story, that's the kind of data that's going to get you that's the kind of question that's going to get you the data you want. So tell me about a time when, any chance you can to pull out a story or a thread of a story is going to be fantastic data for you. So although I know you're asking some specific questions, and I don't think you're going to say, so tell me about your parking situation. I know you're not going to say that, but it's just a prompt for you. I get it, but I know that, anytime you can hear, someone may actually have a really good parking story. They may be like, well, you know what? Because I'm adjunct, now with the unionization, I was able to apply for a parking pass, and my parking is so easy, it makes all that stress of getting from the office to the campus just go away, and I love it, and that's a huge piece of data for you. But any kind of story you can get is great.
Okay.
And then, as Dr. Patterson said, 3 to 5 is great. Just recruit more than that. Just try to interview more like 5 to 7, so that if you end up with some duds, you can cut those and focus on the others. Or you end up with some people who, some people who go, oh yeah, I'd love to. I really will meet you at 1 o'clock at Starbucks, and they no show. So you've got, you've got your minimum, yeah. Absolutely. And definitely more on the 5 side instead of the 3 side. So if you end up with 5, I think that's great. That's why I'm saying maybe recruit 5 to 7, and that one, if you end up with 5, you're good.
Good idea.
Awesome. Okay, I think that's it for my list. And this is, like I said, Kelley, this is great. We're so close, Dr. Patterson, in terms of having, the IRB application ready and a really good solid set of interview questions. And now it's just that site. Just got to get that site.
Absolutely. So I'm really happy about that. And whatever I can do to help or assist, let me know. I think you're right on target. So, great job. Again, however I can assist, I think you got it covered. So just let us know how close you are to the site, and if there are other things that you need, some clarity on. I looked through your document a couple different times, and I'm pretty happy with the work that you put together as far as the literature review. And you did note that, naturally there's a lot of literature out there. So just making sure that you interpret the pieces that are going to really align with your work is going to be really important too. So, but that's for a little later. We want to get through this first piece right now.
That's right. Great.
So
any questions for us, Kelley? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
Even, I'm sorry, to 4-year college, to 2-year college, you'd want to adjust, obviously, some of your narrative in the first 3 chapters. But we'll just have to cross that bridge when we come to it. So I would give it I would give them a week, follow up, give them another week. If nothing at all, then I would go and start to think about what makes the most sense for you. Does it make sense to stick with this topic and study it, study more at the individual level, or and you could come up with another take on the topic that might look at it different. I can't even think about what it might look like differently as a case study. You could instead of having the adjuncts at the center, which I know is important to you and you want to give them voice, you could take the HR professionals or the administrators from some other angle on it. Again, it's still super sensitive, so I don't know how much receptivity there will be to that either. But yeah, I would just give it not too much longer and then move forward with next steps, and just sort of think. That gives you a little time to think through it too.
Yes. Great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Kelley. This was fantastic. I really enjoyed this. This was a great conversation. And thank you, Dr. Patterson, for being here and for recording for us, so that we could get all this down. And Kelley, if you don't mind, if you would kind of, you've been taking notes, I'm sure, just kind of put those back in an email to us so we know that that we've captured all those items, and then we will go on to hopefully getting your site and hopefully getting you to IRB soon and all of that.
Excellent.
Great. All right. Thank you guys so much. Have a wonderful weekend.
You as well. Thank you both.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm sorry. I'm back now. I had something else moving at the same time, so I wanted to make sure I stopped that. So rephrase your question, because you said at the very end of the chapter.
Yeah, at the very end.